Hello, my name is Daniel Marino, and this is the Nahachi Project. So today I want to share something that I was reading. It's by an author and a lecturer known as Alan Watts, who was a guy who did a lot to popularize Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy in the West. So he illustrates in this little book a concept that I think is very interesting when it's applied to Kata. And it's actually a concept you might be familiar with because Bruce Lee references it in his most famous movie, Enter the Dragon. So the title of this little essay is called The Finger and the Moon. And I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs of it. There is an old Christian phrase, crux medicina mundi, not sure about the pronunciation there, the cross, which means the cross, the medicine of the world. A phrase which is rather remarkable in that it suggests that religion is a medicine rather than a diet. The difference is, of course, that medicine is something to be taken occasionally, like penicillin, whereas a diet is regular food. Perhaps this analogy cannot be pressed too far, since there are medicines like insulin, which some people have to take all the time. But there's a point to the analogy, a point expressed in another Latin saying, not at all Christian, since its author was Lucretius. Tantum religio potuit suadere malorum. Too much, which means too much religion is apt to encourage evil. I'm not thinking so much of the exploitation of the poor by the corrupt priesthood, or of the obvious evils of zealotry and fanaticism. I'm thinking rather of the old Buddhist metaphor of the doctrine which is like a raft for crossing a river. When you have reached the opposite shore, you do not carry the raft on your back, but you leave it behind. There is something here which applies not only to the mere handful of people who might be said to have reached the opposite shore, but to most of us. To carry out the metaphor a little, if you are going to cross the river, you must make haste. For if you dally on the raft, the current will carry you downstream and out to the ocean, and then you will be stuck on the raft forever. And it is so easy to get stuck on the raft, on religion, on psychotherapy, on philosophy. To use another Buddhist simile, the doctrine is like a finger pointing at the moon, and one must take care not to mistake the finger for the moon. Too many of us, I fear, suck the pointing finger of religion for comfort instead of looking where it points. So, really, interesting concept being illustrated there. And of course, he's applying it to, religious and philosophical thought, which I would say is a much bigger, subject than the way that I think it can be applied to karate practice, specifically to kata. But, the way when I read it, immediately couldn't help but think of my karate practice and think how kata is like the finger. And, the kata points toward the moon, which is for me the application. And it's this idea that I think so many martial artists get hung up on the superficial aspects of kata, which would be, just the physical movements themselves in the exact sequence in which they're demonstrated in the kata. And I think that really will only take you so far. At some point, you need to abandon it, just like he's talking about in the metaphor, where the kata gets you to a certain place, and then you leave it behind. Just like you cross a river with a raft, you don't bring the raft with you, but you leave it at the shore. And I think that's just such a cool way to think about the process that I use for kata in my practice, which is that the kata as it appears on the surface level is just the very beginning, or as I put in a previous video, the tip of the iceberg. And what you really want to do is abandon the very formal structure that's found in the Nahachi kata at that surface level, so that you can adapt it and you can vary it in your practice. And that's what ultimately enables you to actually use the kata for real combat or for sparring. Because if you're going to apply these movements to a chaotic situation, it of course needs to be something that is highly adaptable. It's not just this It's not just this sequence of movements that is set in stone and never changes. You need to abandon that. You need to leave it behind so that you can move on to the broader practice of the kata. So I hope that makes sense to some of you. I hope it's at least something that you find interesting. And I'll be back with more content soon. Thank you very much for watching.